Hi, welcome to the first section of these tutorials of how to storyboard like a pro. I wanted to start by letting you know a little more about how I got into all of this. Everyone's path into what they end up doing is different, but it's always useful to hear an example of how to possibly get into a certain industry or into an interest. And then after that, I'll let you know what the course will cover and what you will need to be able to do the lessons. So for me, drawing was always, it was a passion of mine. I mean, it was the thing that I was probably most recognised for as a kid. From a very early age, it just inspired me. I was inspired by cartoons on the TV. I loved comics and all those kind of things that a lot of kids do. But as I reached the end of my school years, I was clear that all I wanted to do as a job was something that involved drawing. So I did the obvious thing. I went off to art college, not that you have to, and I studied graphic design, specialising in illustration. But because I was just such a comics and cartoons fan, I didn't really learn many other forms of illustration. Everything I did was very, very kind of comics focused. And then something happened that when I left college, I remember seeing an article in a magazine about a British artist called Martin Asbury, who worked on a newspaper strip called Garth. He'd done many other things, but he's really well known for Garth. And in this article, it was explaining that he had done all the storyboards for the movie Greystoke, starring Christopher Lambert. You may have seen it, early 80s film, about Tarzan. Anyway, his storyboards were absolutely amazing, just as panels of drawing and the economy of drawing. And it was then I became aware that as much as I was trying to forge a career in comics after leaving college, that there were potentially other opportunities as well. So that kind of stayed with me in my mind as I moved into my comics career. So you'll probably know some of the comics that I've done: Transformers, X-Men, Spider-Man, Venom, all loads of stuff. Nightman, even did some Captain Planet, Thundercats. So I worked in comics for a number of years until the mid-90s, when the comics industry was beginning to sort of fade a bit. Titles were not doing very well. People weren't collecting comics like they had done in the past. And then I was offered a job in the games industry, which I was never a gamer as such, but I was fascinated by all the design and the environments, the worlds of games. So I went to work for a games company for about 3 years, designing characters and backgrounds and props. And one of the other things that I had to do when I was working for the games company was storyboards for the cutscenes. So I learned really fast what is the best way to put together a storyboard that the animators could then work from. Then from there I did some more comics, and then I started working in animation purely because a colleague of mine was working for a company who needed characters designer on a cartoon, kids cartoon. So I did that and designed environments again. So it was kind of on and off what I was doing, all sorts of bits of comics and bits of animation design. And then somebody I had worked with at the games company got in touch with me and asked me if I wanted to do some storyboards for a BBC show called The Fades. And this was it. This was a massive game changer for me, purely because somebody I'd known like 10 years previous and hadn't seen since got back in touch with me because they needed a storyboard artist. So that was great. I went to London, I met the director and did storyboards for The Fades. And then a little time after that, that same director, Farron Blackburn, got in touch with me and asked me if I wanted to work on the next show he was working on, which was Doctor Who. And from there, the work began to build very, very slowly, but it's all about the connections you make in the industry. So now I do both. I tend to do live action and I tend to do animation boards as well. But this whole series is, for the most part, about live action boards. So clearly we need to talk about the difference between live action and animation, because there is a difference in the boards, what their purpose is and the way that they're executed. Before I kind of give you the sort of distinction between the two, the one thing that we really need to get clear, and I kind of covered this in the introduction, and what is one of the key things about this course, which doesn't really seem to be covered in any other course, is that storyboarding is not about drawing. Now, I got into storyboarding because I could draw, and traditionally storyboards have always been drawn purely because it's the quickest way to get an image down that the director and anyone else who needs to see it can look at. But these days there are other ways of doing it, so it's important to know that it's not about drawing. It had used it traditionally, like I said, and it is useful to have some drawn elements in the boards that you do. But what it's actually about is communication. It enables the director to communicate with those visuals with other people that need to see what the scene is going to be hoping to achieve. So stunt teams and the producers and special effects people and all that kind of stuff. Storyboards are something that's executed right at the beginning of the production process. We'll get into the production pipeline, as we call it, possibly in the next section, but storyboards happen right at the beginning because they're the cheapest way to visualize something before you get into the expense of building sets, filming, etc., etc. So it's a way of showing exactly what the shots are. And that will usually be action, fight scenes, choreography, stunts, special effects, visual effects. We will get into all of this in further sections. Okay, so let's have a look at what the whole course is going to involve and what's in it for you. So we're currently in section 1, which is the overview, and then we move into section 2. So section 2 is the basics, getting the basics. In this section, we're going to look at what the process is and the basic language of film. This is all really important, because before you can begin to storyboard, you need to know how it fits into the whole process of making a film or a TV show. That will then lead us into the cinematic terms that you'll need to know to be able to do your boards. So we'll talk about the production pipeline. Then we'll talk specifically about scripts, how they're constructed and how to interpret them. We'll then go on to boards. So we'll talk about the language of boards in terms of scene, description, dialogue, how you lay all that out and how you describe what's going on in any particular shot. We'll look at storyboard template. We'll talk about camera language and lenses, all things that you'll need to know to be able to annotate your boards effectively. And then finally there'll be some resources at the end of that section. So there'll be a storyboard template for you to look at, and a sheet of all the jargon and all the script terms. So then on to section 3, equipment and software. So this is the bit where we take a look at all the software that is available for you to be able to do your boards. And obviously we'll concentrate on the ones that are affordable, and very definitely concentrate on the ones that are free or open source. So this will be software for scripting and also for laying out your boards, and software for drawing up or enhancing your boards, and then exporting it and saving it off as PDFs, usually for you to send to your client. And then there'll be a resource at the end of that where you can, with links for you to be able to download all the relevant software. Then on to section 4. So this is setting up. So this is how to set up the software to use it. So I'll go through showing you how to download and install the software, and then I'll help you set up any additional things that you'll need to know, like certain brushes in the drawing software, bits and pieces that will be relevant for you to be able to create the board. And then we move into section 5. So section 5, let's begin. Right, this is where we actually go through the whole process, starting from meeting the director, how to have a conversation with the director, what you need to do while you're having the meeting, how to break down the script, how to block a script out. So that's essentially getting some sort of sketches or things for the board, and then how to place all the characters, environments, props, everything that you'll need, some rough drawing techniques, annotating it, submitting it to the client, etc. Then into section 6, which is presentation of your work. So essentially, what's the form it needs to take so that you can present it to the client. And finally, section 7 will be some tips and tricks, not necessarily about drawing or any of that kind of stuff, but tips and tricks as to how to best engage with the industry, really, and how to approach people and how to have successful meetings. One of the other things that I want to cover in this section, very briefly, because it's something you need to know as you go into your first bit of storyboarding, is something called the line. Some people call it the 180 rule, but in the industry it's very often known as the line. It's kind of a rule. I mean, rules are there to be broken, and a lot of directors do break it, but the only way you can effectively break a rule is if you know what the rule is in the first place. So I'll show you that. So I'm going to show you that by using one of the pieces of software that we will be using as we start to storyboard. So don't worry too much about that now, but it's a useful tool within that piece of software to be able to describe to you what the line is. So here we are in Storyboarder. This is the main screen. This is a piece of software that we'll be using quite a lot. I do a lot of my live action boards in this. It's a fantastic piece of kit, and you can get some really good boards quite quickly, and then it's up to you how much you finesse them afterwards. So what I have here, as you will see, are a couple of figures. Now I'm just going to pop into this screen here. Don't worry too much if you're not following what I'm doing with the software. Just follow the figures. So I've dropped in mannequins here, which is something you can do in Storyboarder. So we've got a male there, female there. And what we've also got here is this object here. And that's the line, essentially. That's what we're going to be referring to as the line. So the line is something that designates the direction of conversation, or the direction of travel, or the narrative interaction between two elements in the narrative. So that could be people or vehicles or animals or whatever. But when two things are in some way related to each other, we tend to use the 180 rule, or stay on one side of the line. So if you imagine this line here travelling just all the way across, it's the thing where you've got two people standing on that line facing each other. So the best way to describe how the 180 rule works is that the cameras will always be on this side of the line, or they can be on that side of the line. But once you've chosen which side of the line they are on, then for any given kind of interaction, you would always have the cameras on that particular side of the line. So you would have maybe a camera here, or here, or here, so you can shoot different angles on these characters, but you'd always place your cameras around here and not cross the line. That's why it's called crossing the line. So for example, you see many times in conversations characters shooting over the shoulder of one character onto the other. So say this is, I don't know, this is Dave and this is Susie. Just made those up off the top of my head. I've obviously known a Dave and a Susie in my past. I have, actually. There are a couple. I remember when I was at college. Anyway, so this is Dave and Susie. They don't look like that, well, they didn't when I met them. So you will be, so with a camera now, this is what you will see on screen, these two characters. So we've got Dave in the foreground here, and we're shooting over his shoulder towards Susie. And you would tend to do that while Susie is talking to Dave. And then you would switch across, so to a camera that's over Susie's shoulder, which would be probably like this. Yeah? So we're now shooting past Susie onto Dave while he says his lines. And then you'll notice, camera cuts backwards, forwards, over Dave's shoulder, over Susie's shoulder. Sometimes you can go out a bit wider, over Dave's shoulder, or a bit higher if you like. So let's just get that right. So maybe like this is a shot that you sometimes see, and then you can cut back to maybe go out wider on Susie, cutting higher. You know, if they're standing talking, for example, maybe at a railway station or something like that, then you know you can have some nice wider shots showing more, and then you could show other characters walking around here while they're talking to each other. But it all happens. Just pull out here. But all those cameras are happening, shooting from here across there, or here, or here, or here. Sometimes high, sometimes low, but that's the way they always go. And then sometimes you're cutting close to one of the characters. There are different ways. There are different ways of getting over to the other side of the line if you need to do that. We'll get into that again when we get to a scene that really applies to that. So just to give you some other example of how this can sometimes work. Hang on a minute, let me just get to the right. This also works with vehicles. So you'll have two vehicles. One's chasing the other. So we've got like a car here and like an SUV here. So the SUV, maybe it's a car chase. The SUV is chasing that car there. And then you might want to cut to a shot that here where we see, you know, we're kind of lower. Cameras are moving back with the cars maybe while they're chasing each other. And then if we want to then cut to show the SUV, from the SUV, they're still chasing each other, but they're always on this same side of the line. And like I've chosen that particular side of the line, but you know, you can shoot it all that way, as long as when you shoot back to the front, your camera is on the same side of the line. It doesn't matter whether it's a high shot or maybe a low shot like that, doesn't matter. Or even if the camera's static and the cars are suddenly coming into the shot, so they come around a corner here and then towards us, the camera's not moving, it's not tracking back with them, but they'll shoot past the camera, and then suddenly you might want to then cut to a close-up of one of the characters in the car. So this is a left-hand drive car. You know, apologies for those in the UK or Australia or wherever. Don't worry about that. We'll talk more about that at some point. So yeah, so you might want to cut close into the character in the car, but as you can see, we're still on the same side of the line that we were when we were out wide. So that's the line. So very basic part of storyboarding, which we will cover again later. So there's the overview. That's everything you can expect coming up. Some longer lectures, some shorter ones. This one's been quite a long one, but look forward to getting into that more with you. See you in the next section.